Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
When it comes to weight loss, no 2 people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't outtrain her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
A Living History production.
I'm Matt McLachlan.
And I'm Pete Smith.
We're battlefield historians who love nothing better than getting out and walking the ground where great battles in history took place.
And now we'd like you to come with us. Every week, BattleWalks will take you to one of the great battlefields of Europe.
As we walk the ground, we'll dig through the pages of history. We'll uncover the secrets of the battlefields, and most importantly, we'll tell the stories of the people who fought and died there.
Welcome to BattleWalks.
Hello and welcome to another episode of BattleWalks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much for listening and sending your feedback in. We've seen literally thousands of new listeners come on board in the past month or so, and a lot of you have been sending great feedback to us via Twitter and Facebook. It's fantastic to receive. So thank you. Please keep it up. We love hearing from you, and also lots of good suggestions about BattleWalks we could do in the future, which is also great as well. It's just wonderful to be out here doing these virtual walks and engaging so strongly with people who are listening. And someone who I know enjoys always hearing from our fans is my colleague Pete Smith. Pete, welcome back.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here again.
Mate, this week we're back to France. We spent a lot of time in France. It's our favourite destination. I mean, you live there. You're such a fan of France. You moved over there, so obviously you're a fan of the battlefields in France. But it's my favourite place to visit as well. And an interesting one today. Again, not necessarily a frontline battlefield destination that everyone would visit on a coach or a car tour, but a really interesting one. We're in the town of Bapaume. Tell us all about it.
Well, Bapaume, it's another one of those difficult names to say, and certainly with my northeastern English accent, very odd to say, so they just have to bear with me. Bapaume, I tend to call it. Bapaume is a little town on the side of the motorway, the A1, which most people whistle past coming from the UK. If you're heading to Paris or anywhere almost, you whistle past it. But it's an integral part of the battlefields of the Great War and earlier and the Second World War. So we're going to talk about all three. So this is a fairly small walk as far as walking's concerned, one side of the town to the other, and we're going to start off at a water tower, which will become apparent while we're starting there in a minute.
It's an interesting place, Bapaume, because it's integral in the fighting of 1916, as you said, in the Somme fighting, and we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail. But also a very strong Australian connection, which as an Aussie I always like seeing when the Aussies came here in 1917. I think we can't overstate how important and objective Bapaume was, particularly in 1916, that it was iconic for the Allied troops, wasn't it, as the destination, the place they just wanted to get to. It was behind the German lines, and it was really just their ultimate destination, wasn't it?
It was indeed, and it was fairly visible from the ridges as we started to take the ridges, especially Poitiers, when we took the village of Poitiers, Australians taking that village. You could then see to the town itself, and that was the objective. The objective of the Battle of the Somme in 1916 was to take the town. Not taken, and eventually will be occupied with fighting, but occupied as the Germans fall back to the Hindenburg Line. So a very important place to eventually take. I suppose one of the reasons in this area, in the Somme region, in fact, it's actually not in the Somme, it's in the Pas-de-Calais, it's just over the border. But it was the largest town and one of the most destroyed towns of the Great War, terribly, terribly destroyed to the extent there was very little left of it. And so that's one of the great things. What we're going to do is talk about what was left and some of the memorials that commemorate what was going on both in earlier years and also during the Great War.
Pete, give us an overview of the town and its history, because it is one of those places in France that is just effectively soaked in blood. The amount of fighting that's gone on there over the centuries is just quite remarkable. Give us the background of Bapaume and its role in several wars.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is of where it is. So right the way from it, when it became a settlement, when people started living here, it's on a junction between the very, very flat Flanders plains, and then there's this ridge, the ridges of the Artois region, and then we get into the Somme and Picardy. So if you were travelling down through Europe, from Northern Europe, so from Holland, let's say, then you would almost certainly come on the roads that would take you through Bapaume. So it became an important city for trade, because people paid tolls, they kept the roads going, and also it was a place to harbour up for the evening because of bandits. There were bandits in the woods all around here, and so again it was a place where you had some shelter if you could get in before the town gates were shut. So always an important place, and so because of that became a place of conflict whenever anybody was invading anybody else in either direction, because it's really always been right on the border of France. No longer, it's well within France, but at one time right on the border of France, abutting either the Spanish, because this was the Spanish Netherlands, so it was held by the Spanish Netherlands most of the time, not by the French. So its history is not really as a French city; it's more as a either Flemish or the Spanish Netherlands, both held it at various times. It's a very complicated. I don't propose to go into the story of it because it gets so complicated, but it's because of where it is. And that's still going to be the case during the Franco-Prussian War, and we are going to be talking about that, 1870-71. It's still in a place that's going to mean that it's in a blocking point, trying to stop the Prussians from advancing on Paris. And also in the First World War, again, trying to stop the Germans here and advancing on Paris yet again. So wars always crossed over this area. So you're absolutely right. It's a place that has a very bloody history, to be truthful.
Well, let's talk about the First World War, because it changed hands several times. It was iconic for both sides during the conflict. Talk to us about the role of Bapaume during the First World War.
Well, Bapaume was really the town that the Germans occupied, and it became their central town of operations, very close to where they're going to. The line will stabilise on the Somme ridges, and just on the far side of the Somme ridges towards the town of Albert. And Albert will become our front line. So the Empire forces, when we took over from the French, Albert is our front line. So these are two towns, they're not really cities, two towns facing each other, tucked into the valleys and the ridges of the Somme, this rippling landscape, and the Germans are going to be controlling the front line from Bapaume, and we are going to be doing the same thing from Albert. So it was a significant and important town just for the fact that this is where everything came through. It came through Bapaume into the front line, feeding into the front line from the town itself.
And let's talk about the Battle of the Somme. We can't discuss Bapaume in any context during the First World War without talking about its huge significance during the Battle of the Somme. Tell us about that in 1916.
Well, in 1916, on the 1st of July, this is what they're aiming to take. This is the objective, is to clear the ridges and then get to Bapaume, and preferably on we go, and rolling up the line. Of course, we do know the Hindenburg Line is behind it, so it's not going to be that easy. But what we're hoping to do is to take Bapaume. And from the 1st of July until mid-November, that is where we're trying to get to. And in fact, as the weather changes, then the Battle of the Somme slowly grinds to a halt and finishes. And it finishes around my village because we don't get to Bapaume, so we can still see it on the ridge in the distance. And it's not until that spring of 1917 when the Germans realise they're not in a perfect condition. There's a bulge in the line. It's going to take more men to hold it. And this is not where they intended to fight. And they've got a perfectly well organised, dug-in position that they've been creating as a fallback position, the Hindenburg Line. And so what they're going to do is fall back to the Hindenburg Line and give up Bapaume. And in fact, in doing so, they will plant a lot of booby traps. They're going to poison the wells, cut the trees down. So they had a scorched earth policy as they fell back. And what will become apparent during this podcast is that will cause certainly the Australian soldiers and others who move into the area as they're falling back. It will cause them a problem.
And 1918, eventually the town obviously changed hands when the Germans launched their spring offensive, and then changed hands again when the New Zealanders came back. So the complicated history of Bapaume continues.
It does, and it has this Antipodean feel to it, because taken by the Australians in 1917 and retaken in 1918, eventually when we forced the Germans back for that final time by the New Zealand division. So it has a real kind of Antipodean connection, Bapaume.
And let's touch briefly before we begin the walk on World War II, because there's a number of sites we're going to see that talk of the town's World War II history, like all parts of France, occupied by the Germans in 1940. And then the citizens had to undergo the oppressive occupation of the German forces for the next 4 years.
They did indeed, and this is one of the areas of total control. France wasn't just occupied by the Germans. There was Vichy France, which is not going to be occupied by the Germans for a large proportion of the war. And then we have occupied areas, and this is an area that is under heavy occupation. It's known as the zone of total control because it's close to getting close to Germany itself, but it's more the fact that from this area, all the foodstuffs and everything that is produced here, the bulk of it will go to Germany. So it's an area that was stamped upon quite heavily. It's also got a heavy industrial area as we would carry on over the ridges towards Belgium. Then we get into a mining area, and the Germans were very keen that area should support their war efforts in the coal that was produced from there as well. So there was a lot going on in this area, and hence a lot of resistance in this area. More than some areas because of the people here. There's quite a socialist, very heavy, strong socialist area, and in fact, communism was fairly rife here in some of the mines, and they managed to get themselves organised a lot quicker than others, with help from Britain. British spies were dropped in here, and we're going to talk about those a little later. So there was quite a lot of resistance in this area, and hence that will cause a kickback from the Germans, and we get a lot of atrocities, I suppose, and a lot of people deported from this area and will die in the camps, in the labour camps, or in fact the extermination camps.
Pete, it's what I'm loving about this series so much, is we're talking about a little town that most people will never have heard of and may drive past or drive through on their touring of the battlefields or driving through northern France. What a rich and bloody and fascinating history just for one small spot on the map.
It is, and actually I've enjoyed doing the research for this because I live very close to it. It's where we go shopping. I go and get the groceries from there. And I drive past little memorials without really noting them because I suppose I'm interested in the Great War. That is my major interest. And I just thought I need to literally start walking through this town. And there's a good little historical society as well. And I was invited along with others about 6 months ago to spend some time with them. And that was fascinating. Even though my French isn't good, I was able to really understand a lot of what was going on. And the layers of history in the town and the things that are still there, hidden away, extraordinary. And we're going to be talking about them as we go into the podcast.
Well, I'm excited. Let's get on with it. Let's begin the walk at the aforementioned water tank. Why are we starting here?
Well, no reason other than it's very visual. It's something, if you're trawling through photographs of the Great War, you may come across it. And so some of you may be aware of it. It's just quite an interesting photograph because it's so unusual. It's an enormous great cylinder, big steel cylinder, lying on its side that was a water tank for the town. So it held the water that increased the pressure. The French like very high water pressure. That's what it's all about. So this enormous water tank lying on its side, bullet riddled, but still kind of fairly solid. And there's a picture of a ladder going up to it on the end of it, and there's a couple of Australian soldiers climbing up the ladder and dropping into the tank to get some shelter from the rain. This is the winter of 16-17, as the Germans have only just fallen back. And I just think it's a great image, and it's one that always sticks in my mind. And I remember several years ago, I was asked by an Australian, just in a casual conversation, Pete, was it still there? And I had to say I wasn't sure. Was it in a wood? Was it lying there still? And so I went up to have a look, and there's a brand new water tank, or a water tank from the 1950s there. Concrete, no sign of the steel one, so it doesn't exist any longer, but it was worthwhile just having a look. And it's just such an interesting point to start off with, very visual if you've got a copy of that photograph of the water tank.
Well, beginning there, where are we going to walk to next?
Yeah, well, that's on the Peron Road, leading to Peron. So we're going to walk in the opposite direction towards Bapaume. And we're going to, the first thing we're going to see is, now I've described it as this because I've known what it is, but not the story, the Dying Mare. It's a very unusual memorial. It's a bronze by the side of the road, and it's a man lying down, just propped up on one elbow and looking up appealingly, I suppose. And it's just known as the Dying Mare. Well, I've been researching this now for a few weeks, and it's absolutely fascinating. And the chap is the mayor, or he was the mayor, a chap called Abel Guide, and he was the mayor before the Second World War, and in fact was involved in the resistance. And the town hall was a hotbed of resistance in the sense that they produced documentation, forged documentation, to get downed airmen out of the area. They were passing through this area, some coming from Belgium, some coming further afield, and then normally heading towards Paris and then onwards to Spain to get over the border into neutral Spain. So they were producing forged documents in the town hall. It was a little occupation, and the mayor, he was the major instigator. He was also involved in ensuring as many of the local young men were not taken by the Germans as slave labour, effectively. They were conscripted into an organisation that then moved them to Germany to work in the factories in Germany. So he was also providing forged documents to try and get them away from the area as well, so they wouldn't be rounded up. So very important guy in a network, but sadly will be given up eventually by another young Frenchman who was captured on his way to Spain himself. They were trying to get him out because he was a bit hot-headed, and he'd actually shot a German policeman when he didn't need to. And actually, the mayor saved his life because the resistance wanted him out the way, and they wanted to kill him. They felt he was causing such a problem for them. The Germans were looking everywhere that it would be easier just to shoot him themselves and then explain to the Germans that not exactly apologising, but get him out the way so he was no longer a problem. The mayor was very much a social man. He was very interested. Philanthropic, I suppose, and he just just didn't think it was right to do that to a young 18-year-old. And so he said, look, I'll get him out. I will get him out of this area up into Spain. And sadly, what happened was he was captured en route on the border of Spain, and he spilled the beans, effectively, and destroyed most of the networks in this area. And in fact, that caused the mayor to be arrested, and he was arrested not in Bapaume, he was arrested in Arras. He was actually at a meeting of the mayors in Arras, knew he was going to be arrested, decided to go for a drink while he was waiting for the Germans because he had no hope of really getting away and didn't feel it was the right thing to get away anyway, and arrested and interrogated fairly hideously, as you'd imagine, tortured, and eventually sent to a concentration camp where he actually died there, Gross-Rosen concentration camp, and he died on the 27th of December in 1944. So he's remembered in this memorial, this large bronze. It was cast by one of the best foundries in Paris at the time. Not to everybody's taste. 1950s design and style is not always everybody's cup of tea. But I like it. I like it more that I now know the story of what happened to him. In fact, there's a little bit to add to that story. There was another man captured when at the same time, and he was he wasn't captured. He actually fought to the end and died under a hail of bullets. And he was a chap called he was an agent called Michael Trobus, who'd been in the British Army and had been I suppose recruited by SOE and had been parachuted in and had been working here for a year or more. And he was also caught in this roundup, and he was a big loss to the resistance network in this area. There's a very good book about him. So yeah, remember his name, Michael Trobus.
It's a fascinating story, Pete, and that sculpture is remarkable. It's something that I think everyone who passes through the town notes because it's just so unusual. The body in repose lying on the top of the plinth. It's quite striking, quite remarkable. So and a story that should be remembered as we pass through all of these little towns in France. Usually, sadly, just about every one of them has a story about officials and citizens who were taken away and rounded up during the Second World War, many of whom did not return, and it's important that we remember them at places like this.
I think it's interesting. It's one of the things I point out, and yet don't stop, because we normally, if we're on a coach or on a tour, we haven't got the time to stop at these places. But there are little memorials all over northern France to the resistance. Normally little plaques at the side of the road, little crosses. Sometimes it's the Cross of Lorraine, which is like a Christian cross, but with a double cross on it, and it's nearly always to the resistance. And I try and stop if I'm by myself and go and have a read, take a photograph of it, and add it to my archive. But never really have the time to research the story. And there are some truly remarkable and horrific stories of the occupation of this country during the Second World War.
Where are we heading to next on the walk, Pete?
Well, only 100 metres away and to the right, so we're just going up a little road, a little lane. It's a dead end, and it leads to the Bapaume Australian Cemetery, and that's what it's called, the Bapaume Australian Cemetery. It's a Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery, and there's a clue in the name. Of course, this cemetery was created at the time of the Australians taking over the town, forcing the Germans out as they fall back to the Hindenburg Line. And an Australian casualty clearing station was set up in the ruins of the town, and the third Australian casualty clearing station. And so these initially are men that died in the fighting around the town, and some of those that were gathered up and buried here. It also contains 23 Germans, because the Germans, when they retook the town in 1918, they found the cemetery and they thought, well, that's handy, we'll use it. It's very common during the First World War for both sides to be using the same cemetery. I think I've mentioned it before in the podcast. So here is a prime example. We have a number of Australians and then the Germans alongside them. In total, so let me look at my notes. How many do we have here? We have 107 named casualties buried in the cemetery. So very small. It's a very small and rather attractive, I have to say, surrounded by market gardens around it, and a little bit of an industrial complex and houses. So it's in amongst all sorts of things going on the outskirts of the town.
Well, it's probably good timing, Pete, to talk about the Australians coming to Bapaume and the reasons they got here. And it's an interesting chapter of the First World War for Australian historians, for people who are interested in the Australians. Not a chapter that gets a lot of coverage, but is surprisingly well known in the names of towns and parks and areas around Australia, because this is the area. This is the time of the advance to the Hindenburg Line, we call it. The Germans were falling back. So as you said, after the Battle of the Somme, the Germans then retreated to their fortified positions they'd constructed called the Hindenburg Line. And so they left all of this open ground as they pulled back and launched this fighting retreat. And the Australians really pursued that military doctrine that a retreating enemy should be pursued as quickly as possible. So the Australians were right on the heels of the Germans as they pulled back. And what it meant was, as the Germans pulled back through towns and villages they'd occupied and staged this fighting retreat, there was a lot of small actions in a number of small towns leading up to Bapaume. And we remember those towns, as I just touched on, in parks and villages and streets all over Australia. You'll see these names pop up, names like Noriel and Largencourt and Morcourt and many little towns that sort of became etched in history because of these actions. And then, of course, throughout March 1917, as the Australians pursued the Germans as they retreated to the Hindenburg Line, eventually they came to the town of Bapaume, which has been iconic in 1916, such an iconic objective that the Australians were extremely excited to get there. And in fact, some of the notes I read was that two of the Australians actually had a foot race to see who could be the first man into the town. So the Australians arrived and were incredibly grateful to be there at last, to be standing in the streets of Bapaume. But of course, things then went rather sour for them during their occupation of the town.
I think it's interesting that this is what a lot of them thought the war was going to be like. Chasing the Germans, harassing them, keeping moving, out in the open, not in the trenches. So a lot of the soldiers were so relieved, and they thought, "Oh, this is it. This is really what we came for." It felt right to be kind of pushing the Germans back in the open, ducking down, firing, a little bit like almost like a Second World War battle. And you get it over and over again in the diaries. Thank God this has come. It's our time, and we're forcing the Germans back. Of course, very sadly, it's not going to last for very long, but it's certainly in the diaries of the soldiers who were fighting here, this is to them, having just spent the horrible winter of 16-17, stuck in trenches, coldest winter for 40 years, to be the weather changing, it's actually starting to warm up, and to be able to move in the open and actually feel that they were winning, because you have to say, there wasn't a massive feel that the Germans were falling back. It was more that the Australians were pushing them back, and that's what they wanted. They wanted to keep in touch so that they felt that they were actually forcing them back, and they were. I mean, the Germans do lose considerable numbers of men, and they are harried and forced back to the Hindenburg until, again, we get to the outskirts of Bulcourt, where it all changes. But it was, and that's why the town, I suppose, was revered at the time by Australia and by the people that were coming into it. Lots of people turned up to come and have a look. This is the first town that's been under German control since 1914, because the Germans have been here since the 26th of September. So this is a long time under German control, and this is the first town that they've had an opportunity to have a look at. And see what damage the Germans had done. In fact, you have to say most of the damage was done by our artillery fire, but it was still the first time that they had an opportunity to have a look round. Also, of course, that's what the Germans were well aware that that's what was going to happen, and so this is why they left a lot of booby traps about, and the unwary were caught very often by booby traps, as we're going to talk about as this talk goes on, continues.
If you're interested in Australian history, then definitely check out this area of the Somme and the Pas-de-Calais when you go to the Western Front, the retreat to the Hindenburg Line. It's a fascinating area. You can do it in half a day driving around. Some fascinating stories, and a lot of fascinating stories are told by the cemeteries that remain in each of these small towns. There's a whole chapter on it in my book, Walking with the Anzacs, if you want to go and explore this in more detail. It's an area that I think is really important and quite overlooked. So go and explore this area, and the highlight of the tour would be arriving in the town of Bapaume, where we are now. So, Pete, just before we move on, let's talk a little bit about the scorched earth policy and the booby traps, because it becomes a really important part of the story a little bit later on. Let's talk a little bit about that, what the Germans were trying to achieve.
Well, what the Germans were trying to do was make it so that there was nothing for our men, as we push the Germans back, to shelter. So no physical shelter. If it rained, there was nowhere to get out of the weather. There was no water available. There would be very little food. The Germans didn't leave any kind of supplies. They destroyed any crops that they thought we could use. So they blew up the churches, the buildings. Obviously, churches are always blown up. And I remember years ago, I had a lady on the tour who said, "Well, those Germans, they're terrible. They always destroy the churches. They're obviously not very religious." That's not the reason at all. Of course, churches are destroyed because of the height. The height of the tower gives the enemy vision. If we're going to take the town, it will give us vision. So always the churches tend to be blown up if they haven't already been destroyed in shell fire. So it's nothing to do with them being not religious. And of course, most German soldiers, the bulk of the German army, wore a belt with "Gott mit uns," God with us, on their belt buckle. So they thought God was on their side. So they also poisoned the wells, and they left a number of delayed action mines. Now, these were really, really sneaky. In other words, a booby trap, but that's going to detonate by itself. Normally, it was acid eating through a wire that was under tension, which then detonated a large caliber shell. And there were a lot of them, but the most famous we're going to talk about in a little while was the town hall in Bapaume, which was still intact. And that should have given everybody a bit of a clue, really, that there was something amiss, that the town hall, this large building with a tower, was still intact and hadn't been destroyed. But for whatever reason, there are all sorts of stories about the Germans leaving two mines, one that was found and removed, and hence they then thought they'd cleared it and said the building was clear and hadn't noticed that there was another mine. But for whatever the reason was, then it wasn't cleared properly, and it will explode. Before we go and talk about that, I'm just going to quickly talk about the cemetery. But we've just been talking about the Bapaume Australian Cemetery, because there's a very sad grave in there, and I don't want to miss it, because it's something something that we don't very often talk about because it's not talked about, and that is suicides during the Great War. Occasionally we talk about suicides after the war. It's something that's a little bit more visual. If you're committing suicide after the war, then people generally are aware of it. But here we have a Major William Macaulay, who was the Assistant Director of Veterinary Services. This is in the British Army. So a man that's not really frontline, but he's involved in making sure that the horses and all of the animals involved in the war are cared for, being the Assistant Director, fairly senior. But he was seen to be, in the days before he committed suicide, to becoming more and more distressed by what he was seeing, and it got to him to such an extent that sadly on the 14th of May in 1917 he shot himself. And he's buried here, so it's something that's very often they're hidden. We don't know who shot themselves, but in this case, because he was so high profile and because he was well behind the lines when he did it. At that time, the fighting had moved to Bulko or to that area, so he shot himself very sadly. So I always like to commemorate men that couldn't accept the war any longer. I think it's very sad that these guys just couldn't accept what they were seeing and what they were involved with. And he wouldn't be involved in anything horrific. It's just visual, what he was seeing visually, and the suffering of animals and people. I mean, we don't know which it was, but whichever it was, a combination of the two, then he couldn't go on any longer. And then there's another guy in there I think is always worth commenting upon, and that's people that shouldn't really be there. And this guy is an American. He's an American who was serving in the AIF, in the Australian Forces, under a false name. He was called Donald, but he was serving as McCarthy. Sadly, he will also lose his life. He was a machine gunner, an American. So it's looking into the little stories in these cemeteries, and you're just fascinating what you can find out.
It's a lovely small cemetery, one of my favourites of the small little cemeteries on the Western Front, and tells such a great story. So I always enjoy spending some time there. And we're going to leave the cemetery now and head on. Tell us about the walls that we can see around us.
Well, you don't see many walls. It's more grass banks, really. I've described it as the Vauban fortifications. Vauban, a French military engineer from the 1700s. In fact, he really saves France to a certain extent. And when we go to Ypres, to Wipers in Belgium, that's also a Vauban fortification. Such an important guy for that period that actually he's in Napoleon's tomb. So where Napoleon's buried in Paris, then the guy, when you walk through, you get your ticket and you walk through, Napoleon's in the centre in this enormous tomb, but on the right-hand side is Vauban. He's actually buried with Napoleon, even though he's a generation before Napoleon, or possibly 2 generations before Napoleon. But Vauban is there. So important guy, and he was the last guy really that redid the fortifications here when the French had the town. But prior to that, it was a Spanish town, so most of the fortifications are originally Spanish, but it goes right the way back to even before that. What is there to see? Well, very little. There's a very good reason for that. In the 1830s, the French wanted to test defences to modern weaponry. In other words, modern explosive devices, modern demolition, and they demolished them in an exercise testing the French army and its ability to demolish defences. So there's very little to actually see in Bapaume on the surface. But beneath, as I discovered with the local historical association, there's an awful lot left of tunnels and shafts that join sections of the defences, the very few sections that still exist, together. So there is a little area. It's where the keep was, the original keep of the town, and it was incorporated into the walls, and that is still there. It's a raised area behind the church. The local French, I think they still know it as the dungeon, but at one time it was known as the dungeon. I've seen it written down as the dungeon, but there's no dungeon there. It's just, I think it's a reference to I don't know why I say that, because I don't know if dungeon in French means the same as it does in English, but I suspect it may do. It'll be to do with the fortifications. But it's now a lawned area and a beautiful garden. You can go in there and have a walk, as you can when you walk around the walls of Ypres in Belgium. So it has that same kind of feel, but there's not a lot left, I have to say.
Leaving the fortifications, Pete, we're heading on to the Town War Memorial, again a focal point of just about every community in France.
Yep, and this one is on a road junction. If you were travelling up and joining the A1, the motorway, then you would go past it. So it's one that most people would be aware of. And it's the woman holding a palm in her hand and a list of the dead from the First World War. And also those will be soldiers that went off to fight from the city, the town, and didn't come back. And then there's a list of the civilian casualties of 1914-18. Most of those will be caught in the bombardments in 1914. The civilian population was evacuated by the Germans if there were any civilians left. So these will be people that didn't move quick enough when the Germans came or felt that they wanted to stay within the town. So we have quite a long list for a northern French town. Not that many civilians were killed in the German occupation when they first arrived in 1914, but we have, I suppose, 15 or more here. And then we have the list of those that during the Second World War were killed serving in the military, and then the list of those that were deported or executed within the town, or came from the town and were deported and executed. So we have a list of them as well. So it covers the whole gambit of what we're going to be talking about, really. And it's recently been renovated. The town council is doing quite a bit of work on their memorials, and this one has been repainted and renovated in the last year. So well worth stopping at just to go and have a look at it.
Quite a striking memorial, particularly with the depiction of the woman and child standing on the memorial. It is
indeed, and the range of them is as diverse as it is in Australia. With the town and village memorials in Australia, you never quite know what you're going to come across, and you get some very moving and memorials, and also some that you're thinking, I don't know if they thought that through very well. Not always ones that fill you with inspiration, I suppose, and make you want to stop and have a look. But I think that's part of the fun. They're all different, and they all need to be preserved and recorded.
We should point out here as well that, like many French war memorials, this says it has the expression "les enfants" on it, and anyone who speaks rudimentary French knows that means children. And there's often a misconception from people who studied decades ago, studied a little bit of French in school, and knows that enfants means children, that these are memorials to children killed during the war. But it's a metaphorical reference to the children of the town, the residents of the town who were killed. So the people on the memorial, there may be some children amongst them, but the vast majority are the adults, the citizens of the town, the children of the town who were killed during the wars.
Yeah, very good point. It's one that I've had to make several times because it is very obvious when you see it, the children of France.
So we continue past the war memorial to the church.
Yeah, the church totally rebuilt, not really a great deal like, and sometimes they are. Sometimes they try to reproduce exactly what had been here before, but in this case they don't. It's a big brick and predominantly brick, a little bit of stone being used, but predominantly brick church, and the Church of St. Nicholas. It's as I say, completely flattened in the war, and it was well photographed by the Germans when they occupied, by the Australians when they arrived, by the New Zealanders when they arrived in 1918, and then at the end of the war when you can buy your souvenir cards of the destruction. And the French, most of these towns were recorded in series of little booklets you could buy of. These are the pilgrims, of course. These are the people returning to find out where their relatives had fought. Sadly, not so many from Australia, but in Britain it wasn't that difficult to get here. And so these are being sold as souvenirs. So we can see lots of pictures of the town in its destroyed state, and what's very obvious is there's very little left of the church, and there's certainly nothing worth saving. So it was rebuilt. There's a couple of things that are famous, I suppose. One is that there is one statue which survived, and that is now revered and within the church still. And then this is one of the things I love. When you start doing research, and I found this out years and years ago, is that there was a painting that had hung in the church, and when the Australian soldiers occupied the town in 1917, then two Australian officers were actually in the ruins of the church, and they noticed that there was a rather large oil painting, and it was a depiction of St. Nicholas, Father Christmas. And they thought, well, that's not bad. That's quite interesting. That would make a good souvenir to take home. But it was large, and there were two of them. So they decided to cut it in half and have half each. And so those halves were rolled up and presumably went into the backpacks of these officers, or given to his Batman to carry. And one of them came back a few years ago now. And I think that's just an amazing story, the story of this painting being rehung, and it hung on the walls of various family members in Australia, until eventually it came to one of the relatives' attentions, and he thought, no, it'd be quite nice, I think, if this should be returned. And the chap that souvenired it was a Lieutenant Vincent Chataway of the 9th Battalion, and it was brought back by one of his relatives. And this is where the mystery deepens, because I can't find it. I've searched for it now for several years, looking in the town hall, in the historical association. When I mention it to people, everybody just raises their eyelids or their eyes. So I don't know where it's gone, and so that's my task over the next year. A bit difficult at the moment because of COVID, but I'm going to track down where it is, because it needs to be on display, because it's just such a great story. And it was also donated with quite a bit of pomp and circumstance, but I don't know where it is at the moment. But just a great story.
Well, we look forward to a future podcast, Pete, where you reveal all about uncovering that mystery. So good luck with that search.
Thank you.
Where are we heading next on the walk?
Well, next we're going to into the Bapaume Museum, which used to be a creche, so an early school for young school children. It's now downstairs. It's just a centre for people to meet and chat, and upstairs is the little museum. You have to book in. You have to find the right people to open up. It's not one that you can turn up and just go and have a look at. But it's a great little museum. Now, I was really taken by it, and I intend to offer my services again when we can travel properly and talk to people to translate a lot of their little labels into English, because there's no English in there at all, and it's so interesting and so visual that you really could do with some labels explaining what was going on. Now, one of the great stories is the building itself, because the building itself was actually paid for by a British benefactor. So what was going on? Well, at the end of the First World War, there was a feeling that France had been devastated and it needed to be helped to be put back on its feet. And so an early twinning association took place where cities in Britain and towns in Britain would adopt a town in France and would help with that rebuilding process. Now, interestingly, Bapaume was picked on by Sheffield, and Sheffield took on the town and decided to try and help. It all rather fell to pieces rather quickly because of the depressions of the 1920s, the big worldwide depression. So it meant that there wasn't really a great deal of money that we could send across to France to help in the rebuilding of France, because we could hardly keep ourselves going. So it didn't work to the extent that it was hoped. But Sheffield donated a knife, fork and spoon in a little case to every child in Bapaume, because, of course, Sheffield is famous for its steel manufacturing of cutlery and weaponry. For years, it produced Britain's swords and bayonets. So it was donated. But there's another little connection, which I just found this extraordinary, is that one of the great and good of Sheffield, a very great man, called George Lawrence, in the sense that he was very philanthropic. He had paid for a stand in the football club. He had paid for the creation of the Boy Scouts. There's a whole list of things. There's a very good little book about him. He created a whole list of philanthropic works within his own city, but also heard about Bapaume and decided that he wanted to do something for the town itself because of that connection. And so he built a series of houses for women who had lost their husbands to move into and were finding things difficult. And he also paid for this school, this fair school for this creche for the children of the town. So that's a beautiful story in its own right, and an interesting story. But the sad aspect is he was killed in the Second World War in a bombing raid on his own town of Sheffield. And that's a very sad story because he lived outside of the town. He knew that the bombers were going over and bombing the town. And so he decided to take some supplies to his work as he felt that they would be scared. So he loaded up with a couple of bottles of whiskey with the idea that would fortify them a bit, and some sandwiches and things, and headed off into the town and just got to his works when the works took a direct hit, and he was killed. So he lost his life in the Second World War. So it's a lovely little story, and told very well in the museum about him, George Lawrence.
Just a wonderful story, Pete. Not one I was aware of, and again, so easy to overlook. It's why it's important that we do these walks through the town and stop and talk to the local people and hear these fascinating little connections with history.
And there's another little story that is relevant again to my previous story, because within this little museum there is another painting, and this is held there, and this is another painting that was returned by a family because their relative again had souvenired it in the town, and in this case he'd souvenired it from a house. Lieutenant Hector Brewer of the 54th Battalion, and this one wasn't cut in half, it was just a complete one. It was reframed and brought back and placed within the museum. So that's a lovely little story. I'm just going to read you what it actually says. So it says, underneath the picture, and this is in English because it was framed in Australia, this picture was retrieved from a house in Bapaume in 1917, which was severely damaged by German shelling. It was souvenired by Lieutenant Hector Brewer, an original Anzac back of the 2nd Battalion, who at the time serving as the signals officer of the 54th Battalion. The picture remained in Australia in his Australian family home for the past 90 years before being returned to its original home in 2007, presented to the people of Bapaume by Mr. Barry Brewer, nephew of Lieutenant Hector Brewer. So that's a story. I think that's another great little story of the return of something back to where it was souvenired from.
Just makes you wonder what extraordinary things are still hanging over mantelpieces in houses across Australia and indeed Britain. And you can understand why. When the Australians arrived in this town, it was absolutely devastated. Just about every building was destroyed. And if you went into the ruins of a house and found something of value like a painting or a piece of furniture or something still in okay condition, it almost made more sense to take it than to leave it there and risk it being damaged again. But obviously, in hindsight, there was quite a bit of pilfering that took place across. I know Ypres as well suffered pretty heavily from the sticky-fingered Australians, and in the storage of the Australian War Memorial where I've been, there's a lot of artefacts that the Australians helped themselves to from the ruins of the town of Ypres as well.
Well, as a collector of Great War memorabilia, I have to say that at the top of my stairs, I have a clock face from a church just outside of Ypres that was souvenired by an officer and for many years was in the Regimental Museum, and when the museum closed it actually went into a skip, and via a contact of mine I recovered it, and it's now on my wall here. So I have a lump of a church here.
I think it's one of the aspects of this history that is just a very important part of the story, is that soldiers, were, and we should remember that particularly with people from Australia. This was a very long way away. The only time any of them would be in Europe. It must have been extraordinary to come through, particularly these ruined towns, with the ghosts of old churches and old buildings. It must have been just an extraordinarily emotional experience for them, and it's little wonder that they wanted to take part of that home with them.
Absolutely right. You can't imagine, can you? Because a lot of these guys would have grown up with the stories of the old country, grown up with the stories of the history, and to find yourself wading through the ruins of that history must have been, I suppose, distressing to some of them, to see all of that destruction of these beautiful Flemish buildings that Bapaume was consisted of. And then to find that the belongings from and the people's things from a lot of these houses were just blown all over the streets. So extraordinary. And I have to say, if I'd have been there, then a couple of things would have probably gone into my pocket as souvenirs. Very often it is religious artifacts, because a soldier who picks up a bit of a rosary or something, or a bit of a church, I had a soldier many years, a family should I say, many years ago, whose relative had taken the toe off a statue because it had been blown off, and he picked it up. It's a religious statue, and he kept it for the rest of his life, this toe of this statue. And you can imagine that rolled up in a hanky, stuffed in your pocket. It's like a lucky charm. Hopefully that bit of extra religion will keep you safe. So you can see why a lot of people did it.
Leaving the former creche, the museum, what is the next stop on our tour?
Well, it's a bit of wall graffiti, and again, I had this pointed out to me when I had a walk around the town with the Historical Association. It was really that walk that set me off thinking that I ought to really do a podcast about what there is to see. And this wall graffiti would have been at one time on the side of a house which was a brothel. And it's Second World War, and the sign reads, you can't read all of it very clearly, but it's off limits, painted on the side of the house, and it's reminding American soldiers that this brothel is not for them, effectively. And it says that it's the town major who was looking after the town who has written this. So out of bounds to troops.
I'm not sure how effective it would have been. Young men fighting in a war. I'm not sure how effective a little bit of signage would have been at stopping them from getting what they wanted. But again, fascinating little chapters. I love, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I just love little bits of graffiti that you see in the battlefield areas. A couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to spend some time at the great chateau at Bertong, which had been the Australian headquarters in 1918, then occupied by the British at the start of the Second World War, and then occupied by the Germans, obviously, throughout the Second World War. And in the downtime I had there over several days, I scoured the walls of the barns and the buildings looking for graffiti, and found a lot of graffiti left by the soldiers. Soldiers love leaving their mark. And even though this graffiti you're talking about is effectively official graffiti, it's just extraordinary the amount of small little bits of writing and soldiers' names and signatures you find on in these towns and on these buildings.
Many years ago, I used to do a bit of guiding for a chateau that just very close to Amiens, and it had been taken by the Germans in both World Wars. And beside the fireplace in the main room, they'd left the graffiti, and the graffiti noted a German regiment in 1914 had graffitied there, and a German regiment in 1940 had graffitied underneath it. So it's just extraordinary to have, from both world wars, graffiti on the wall.
We're now going to head to something that I think is a really fascinating part of the story of Bapaume, and something that I always like inspecting and taking people to because of its connection with a famous photograph as well. Tell us about this statue of the French general, and then I'll give my little anecdote about why I love it so much.
Well, it's taken quite a bit to get to the bottom of the statue and its history, because it's damaged. So was it damaged in the First War? Was it damaged in the Second War? The statue is of a general, a French general, Louis L.C. Faidherbe. That's almost certainly not how you pronounce it. Faidherbe sounds okay to me. He was an officer in the French army of the 1870s, and in fact he was involved in a battle that held, well, it's not quite true. It didn't exactly hold the Prussians. They met each other just on the outskirts of the town, and they fought themselves to a standstill. So there is no winner. But if he'd have followed up, you have to say, if the French officer had followed up, he probably could have had a very good, successful battle in a period when the French army is not doing particularly well, and eventually will lose this war when the Prussians capture Paris. So he's commemorated here for holding the town and managing to stop the Prussians just very briefly. In fact, they were heading to Peronne. That's what they really wanted to take, and they will successfully a few weeks later take Peronne. But this just slowed them down just momentarily. So he's commemorated here. That statue was placed in the middle of the town, in the square, and was there when the Germans arrived in 1914. Now, I've just found a brand new picture of it as the Germans are arriving, when the town is still in very good condition. It's not been destroyed, it's not been damaged, and the memorial hasn't as well. It sits there in the centre of the town. But by the time we get to 1916, it's gone. There is no statue on the plinth any longer, and has disappeared. And now, apparently, it was taken and it was melted down by the Germans. They thought it was bronze. In fact, it wasn't. It was brass. But not that makes any difference, really. It was then melted down. And so at the end of the war, the town's gone around it, but the plinth is still there. And in the 1930s, it was decided that it should be rebuilt, and it was put back on. So it's put back on exactly the same, cast exactly the same, and that's always been my trouble. I've always looked at it and thought, was it hidden? Has it been put back on there, or is it a recast? But apparently, it's been recast. So it's a recast of the original and put back up. And then it was very badly damaged, or it's riddled with bullet holes during the Second World War. Now, again, I don't know which period. I don't know whether this was when the Germans arrived, or when the Americans arrived, or in perhaps resistance fighting around the town hall, because the town hall is also badly damaged, which the town hall is beside this memorial, and it has bullet holes all over it, which you can still see. They've been patched, but you can see them. And so the poor old general there, you can drive round him looking at him, and you can see right through him in several locations where bullets and fragments of shrapnel have gone right through him. So he still sits on top of his plinth there, and it's just a great connection with three wars: the Franco-Prussian War, the First World War, and the Second World War.
And the aspect I really like about it as well is it's a very strong Australian connection, because a photographer took a picture of the Australians arriving in the town and outside the town hall, and in the foreground of that photo in 1917, this is before the town hall blew up with the mine that we're about to talk about, the town hall is still intact. Australians are gathered around the plinth. There's no sculpture on it. They're just gathered around the plinth. In fact, I think what was on top of the plinth in the photo is what looks like a log. It appears that the Germans were disguising it as an artillery piece, or they made it look like it was a gun. They fashioned a large log on top of it to make it look like it was an artillery piece to aerial photographs. But the Australians are gathered around it, and one industrious guy is scratching his name into the base of the plinth. And I have scoured that plinth, and I've convinced myself that I've found where he scratched his name in. I'm probably kidding myself, but there are definitely marks and scratches, and you can see where the Aussies did write that graffiti into the sculpture, into the base of the plinth. Sadly indistinguishable now. You can't read who they were, but I just love standing in that same spot and putting my hand out and scratching into the stone the same way a soldier did with his pocket knife a century ago.
Yeah, it's a great image. I know that image very well, and I've actually done the same. I've crawled all over it trying to see if I could find anything. But you're right. You can see that there were things scratched on it, but they now blend together, and you can't make it into anything, which is very sad. It's a shame.
Well, let's talk about the town hall. The reason that photograph was taken, the the town hall, a very important building with sad histories we've touched on. Let's talk about the town hall and its destruction with the mine.
Okay, well, the town hall was beautiful. I mean, it was built in the 12th century originally. It's a beautiful building. Actually, the building that replaces it now is very similar. So they didn't copy exactly, but it's very similar in its style and feel. But on the 25th of March in 1917, then it's going to detonate. It's about 3 in.m. And it's going to catch a lot of soldiers unaware who had been sheltering beneath it, because it had a series of walkway beneath the building itself, and so men were sheltered there. There was actually a canteen had been set up, so a canteen, soldiers could get a hot cup of tea there, and oddly, not planned, of course. It was 10 days after the Germans had left, and that was what they set it up for, but they didn't know who was going to be there. They hoped that some of the, I suppose they wouldn't even know it was going to be Australians that would take the town, but they were hoping that senior command would move into the town hall, so it would catch the senior command. But what was very sad, it actually caught 2 French dignitaries who had come back to have a look at the town and really to accept the town back under the control of France again. Remember, since 1914. So they are Raoul Briquet and Albert Talandier. And they had moved in that day, and they decided to sleep in the town hall. So they were asleep in the town hall when it detonated. And it really did detonate. I mean, this thing destroyed the town hall completely. It killed an awful lot of Australians who were using the town hall as their headquarters, and they were actually military police or people connected with running the roads around the town. So there was actually a light horse detachment. Very unusual. We often think, what on earth is the Australian light horse doing during the First World War? Because they're certainly not going to be drawing their bayonets and charging as they did at Beersheba. So they were very often used in a role for scouting ahead and also policing duties. So they had put their horses underneath the town hall. And they were sleeping, and they were killed in the detonation as well. So it caught only Australians. It was only Australians who were around the town hall, in the town hall, when it detonated at 3 in the morning. It's now commemorated in a brand new memorial that's on the side, and actually I was involved in the raising of this memorial. It's a brass, actually it was going to be brass, it's not now, it's marble, black marble, plaque on the side of the town hall, listing as many of the Australians that we could ascertain had died in the detonation. I'm sure we've missed some, but it was a good a listing as we could get of people that died in the detonation. The Australian cemetery in Bapaume, the one we've already talked about, quite a few of the guys are buried in there who died in the detonation of the town hall. And it was exactly as I described. It was a wire under tension that then the acid cut through it 10 days later and hit the nose of a large shell and set off the blast.
I think it's interesting. My research when I did Walking with the Anzacs indicated about 30 Australians had been killed in the blast, which is obviously a huge number to be killed in the blast and the collapse of the building. So really quite horrific. And there's some terrible stories about the Australians, in the dark of night trying to reach men who were shouting out, and some of them they did get out, but sadly many of them were killed. Just a terrible chapter. I think the one interesting thing about it is the Australians were absolutely outraged that this sort of thing went on. They considered it high treason and beyond the pale of what should go on during warfare. But that's a little bit ironic because, I've just finished working on Peter Hart's book about the Gallipoli evacuation, which is now available to buy if you are so disposed. But one of the key points, there's a whole chapter dedicated to it in Peter's book, talking about the booby traps that the Australians left with glee for the Turks when they evacuated Gallipoli. And so it's something that I think just sadly goes on, is that there is a military purpose. It was the same at Gallipoli. They wanted to delay the Turks as much as they could once the Turks advanced and entered their trenches, and it was the same here. The Germans wanted to delay their enemy as much as they possibly could. But I must say that a mine going off 10 days after the evacuation is probably pushing the boundaries a little bit of what could be considered fair play during war.
Yes, I agree, and it's something that went on and has gone on in warfare almost from day one. If you can catch your enemy, and here I think the key here was that they weren't just trying to get the odd soldier. They hoped that the high command, that the commanders, that senior officers would move into a building that looked like it would suit them. because it was fairly intact, and it had a high tower that was still there, partly there, and so that was the idea, and it almost worked. If it had been a couple of days later, then it would have been, I think the loss to Australia would have been, it was bad enough, but I think most of the men that died were, not that it makes any difference in a sense, but they were privates and corporals and sergeants. I don't think there are any or very few officers, whereas a few days later, then it would have caught possibly some very important people. So the French, of course, for the French, it did catch these two dignitaries. So they're remembered as well. They are carved in marble on a plaque commemorating them on the wall of the church, beside now, which is the memorial to all of the Australians that died, or as many as we could ascertain. That's damaged, actually. It was damaged in the Second World War. So again, we get this overlapping history, that the memorial commemorating these two French dignitaries killed in 1917, they are now slightly defaced by shrapnel and bullets from the Second World War. So again, overlapping history at the same location.
I certainly appreciate your efforts, Pete, and everyone's efforts to put a memorial up to the Australians, because when I first started visiting Bapaume, and indeed when I wrote Walking with the Anzacs, there was only the memorial to the French civilians who'd been killed, and it seemed a rather notable omission that the two Frenchmen should be so honoured on the side of the building, and the 30 Australians who were killed had no mention. So thank you, and thank you everyone who was involved in the construction of that memorial. It's important we don't forget these little chapters of history.
Indeed, and it's an important little chapter, and one that since that memorial has been built, I've had the enjoyable experience of taking round several families who had relatives who were injured in the detonation of the town hall. In fact, one of the relatives had been 7 hours. He was trapped underneath the town hall and rescued, and sadly so badly injured that it took him out the war, but saved his life, I suppose, because of that. And he went on to have a very successful career in Australia. But we managed to get permission to go up to the top of the tower with that family and experience the views from the top of the tower, which you can do. Again, it's one of those things. It's kept quiet. Nobody really realises that. But if you make a prior appointment, or even go and talk nicely to the receptionist, she will just reach below the counter, give you a key, and say, "There you go," and you can go to the top of the tower and have an excellent view over the town.
Well, a very important town, as we said before, and a name, Bapaume, an unusual name, and you'll note it in the names of streets and parks across Australia because it meant so much. And it was instances like the destruction of the town hall that etched it permanently into the minds of the servicemen who'd been there. So again, a very important chapter of the story. One last stop before we finish our walk around the town of Bapaume is the communal cemetery.
It is. So we carry on through the town, right through the centre of the town, out the other side. There's, just to point out, there's quite a few nice little bars in the town when we can go to bars again. And you can also find something to eat in Bapaume because there are a couple of restaurants, but there are also quite a few bakeries. So if you want to pick up your baguettes from there, then a great place to just briefly stop on your route across the battlefield. So we're going to walk right the way almost to the outskirts of the town, heading towards Arras. This time, this is the road to Arras, and we get to the communal cemetery. In this area, the cemeteries don't tend to be beside the churches. I have no idea why. I often joke it's to do with vampires, but I don't really know why. It's probably to do with the worry of diseases coming from the dead. But for whatever reason, and it goes back centuries, it's not just recently, the cemeteries are always almost just beyond the town boundary. So they're on the outskirts of the town. So this one is a rather large municipal cemetery. It's also got an element of Commonwealth war graves, burials in there as well from the First World War. I've often wondered why that is. Why did they bury men in the civil cemeteries? Well, I think it was just that the civil cemetery was there. Of course, it was there during the fighting. It was there after the fighting. And if that was close by to where these men sadly lost their lives, they buried them. I suppose the interesting question is, when they were concentrating the cemeteries and sorting the cemeteries out in the 1920s, and we've talked about this, why did they not go into the civil cemeteries and gather up these, very often just two or three, there's a few more here in this one, but two or three very often guys buried in the civil cemeteries and move them? I don't know the answer. I'm guessing, but I would say that it's because the townspeople wanted almost a representation within their civil cemetery of the people that had died fighting to regain their town or village from the yoke of the German occupiers. So I think that's possibly the reason. It was just felt the right thing to do, to leave some representative graves within the civil cemeteries, but I'm not sure. We'll never really know. There's nothing written down why it should be. The reason why, as well as these, and there are quite a few Australians buried in the cemetery, but the other thing that I always come and have a look at here are the two monuments to the 1870s, to the Franco-Prussian War, which also are within the confines of the cemetery. And one of them is a rather large memorial to the French who died fighting here. I think there are also burials within it. It's very difficult to judge on some of the French memorials whether it actually is a mass grave or is it just a memorial. So I'm going to call it a memorial, but I'm not sure, to be truthful, whether it also may contain the remains of some of those that died here. And then really, really oddly, there's a Prussian. There's a Prussian officer buried in the cemetery who died during the same time. And talking about the First World War burials and why they're there, I have absolutely no idea. It's almost like he was forgotten. And I think that's possibly what happened, is that he was forgotten, he was buried there, he was forgotten, and by the time they realised he was there, it was decided that they would leave him there. So he's called Sigmund Erden, and he's a Prussian officer, and he rests within the civil cemetery. I just find that fascinating that he should be there, especially knowing that during the Second World War and the First World War, they went to great lengths to gather the Germans up into either big concentration cemeteries or to make sure that they were brought together, sometimes within the Commonwealth War Graves cemeteries. They would never be left within a civil cemetery, as this chap has been. So that's the last of the sites within the town. I added another one to Matt's quick notes, so I'll just quickly mention it. Just outside the town, if you're carrying on Arras Road, is the actual memorial to the Franco-Prussian War and the fighting that took place here. It's a rather damaged low obelisk. It was damaged in the First World War. Again, it's just recently been renovated, but it's just on the road, just outside of the town boundary. So if we were remaining within the boundary for the podcast, then it's outside. But it's well worth looking at, because if you're going that way towards Arras, then you're going to drive past it, and that is the memorial to the actual fighting that took place during the Franco-Prussian War.
Well, Pete, thank you so much for that. Just, again, the layers of history. I mean, we've explored so much in a walk around a little town. It just makes you wonder any town in this area would have the same depth of information and intriguing history. So just a really interesting one. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to more of these explorations of smaller towns as we go on with the series.
Good. Well, I've enjoyed talking about it, because I think you're absolutely right. These little towns, they need us to stop, if we've got the time, to stop and do a bit more exploring. But you need somebody to kind of point you in the direction. So hopefully that's helped a few people who will in the future pass through here.
Well, give us your feedback if you enjoy these walks through these smaller towns. Let us know. Let us know what other areas of the battlefields you'd like us to cover, because the list is just about inexhaustible of places we can cover. We're really looking forward to doing some exciting ones in the future. Pete, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for your insight and your humanity on these walks as well. It's really touching. I love hearing what you've got to say about these towns.
No, it's great, Matt. Enjoying them. Looking forward to the next one.
At Leidos, a brilliant mind is smart, but a brilliant team is smarter. A ship that finds enemy subs is smart, but an autonomous fleet, that's smarter. Defending against cyber attacks? Smart. Stopping attacks before they start? Smarter. And using AI tools is smart, but integrating trusted mission AI into your technology is smarter. We're not just making technology solutions in national security and health. We're making smart smarter. Leidos.